Vienna, the winter of 1828. A man not yet 32 lies in a rented room, and his own body is turning against him. His hands shake so violently he can barely sign his name. His gums bleed. His teeth are working loose in their sockets, and his mouth fills with saliva faster than he can spit it out. A pint a day some patients produced, thick and stinking of metal. His doctors are pleased. The drooling means the medicine is working. The man is Franz Schubert, one of the greatest composers who ever lived. The disease is syphilis. The medicine is mercury. And here is the part nobody tells you. For the better part of 500 years, that was the deal a doctor offered you. Catch the pox, and the cure was a slow poisoning with a shining silver liquid that rotted your mouth, wrecked your kidneys, and sometimes killed you faster than the disease would have. In 2025, scientists tested strands of Schubert's hair. They found it saturated with mercury, exactly what you'd expect from the treatment that was supposed to save him. The same poison that killed Schubert built the richest empire on Earth. It powered the California gold rush, and it is falling out of the American sky right now, silently, into the water, into the fish, onto the sandwich you might eat tomorrow. This is the story of the most useful poison humans ever found. Here is where it begins. Long before it was a cure or a weapon or an empire, mercury was a magic trick. Picture a hillside in central Spain, a place the Romans knew 2,000 years ago, and the Arabs later named Almadén, literally, the mine. In the rock there sits a mineral called cinnabar, a deep blood-red stone, heavier in the hand than it has any right to be. Crush it, roast it over a fire, and something impossible happens. The red rock breathes out a vapor. The vapor cools. And what runs down the side of the furnace is a bead of liquid silver metal, rolling and splitting and chasing itself across the stone like something alive. Every other metal humans knew was solid. You could hammer it, forge it, trust it to hold a shape. This one poured like water and shattered into 100 trembling mirrors when you touched it, then pulled itself back together the moment you looked away. The Romans called it hydrargyrum, water silver, which is why, on the periodic table hanging in every American high school chemistry classroom, mercury still carries the symbol Hg. The English called it quicksilver, from an old word meaning living, the living silver. People had been pulling it out of that Spanish hillside since before there was a Roman Empire, and they would keep pulling until the year 2003. Almadén holds the single largest concentration of mercury on the planet. Roughly a third of all the mercury humanity has ever produced came out of that one district. To put the timeline in American terms, Romans were roasting cinnabar at Almadén more than 1,600 years before there was a United States to ship it to, and they knew, even then, that it was dangerous. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder described the red powder, described the vapor, and noted that the work was done by convicts and slaves, because free men did not last. Go down into one of those early workings with a Roman prisoner. The air is warm and close, and carries a faint sweetness off the roasting ore, almost pleasant, which is the cruelest part. The poison never announces itself. He crawls through low galleries by the light of an oil lamp, chipping loose the heavy red stone, and by the end of every shift, a fine cinnabar dust coats his skin, his lungs, the back of his throat. For a week or two, nothing. Then his hands start to betray him. A tremor he can't will away, so the tools rattle in his grip. His gums go soft. His memory slips its moorings. Enough months of it, and some men simply lose their hold on the world, wandering and muttering. The Romans didn't have a word for mercury poisoning, but they had a solution for it. Use people you could afford to lose. Anyone sent into the cinnabar was, in a quiet bureaucratic sense, already dead the day they walked in. Half a world away, the same shining liquid was seducing an emperor. In China, around 210 BC, the first man to unite the entire country, Qin Shi Huang, the emperor who built the earliest Great Wall and the Terracotta Army, became convinced that mercury was the secret to living forever. His alchemists fed him pills and tonics laced with it. Ancient accounts say he was buried beneath a map of his empire, with its rivers and seas recreated in flowing mercury, and modern soil tests around his still unopened tomb mound show mercury levels far above anything natural. The emperor who wanted to cheat death almost certainly died of the cure. He was chasing eternity, and he swallowed a slow, glittering poison to get it. That is the pattern you are going to watch repeat, over and over, for the next 2,000 years. Mercury always looks like the answer. It is never free. For most of history, mercury was a curiosity, a pigment, an alchemist's obsession, a medicine for the desperate. Grind cinnabar fine and you get vermilion, the brilliant red the Romans painted onto the walls of Pompeii and Chinese artists brushed onto imperial scrolls. It was beautiful, expensive, and mostly useless. Then, in the middle of the 1500s, a man in the Spanish colony of Mexico figured out what mercury could really do, and he rewired the global economy in the process. His name was Bartolomé de Medina, and around 1554, he perfected a technique that would come to be called the patio process. The problem he solved was this. The New World was full of silver ore, but most of it was low-grade. Rock with silver scattered through it in amounts too thin to bother smelting the old way. Medina discovered that if you crushed that poor ore, spread it out in a courtyard, and mixed in mercury, the mercury would seek out the silver and bind to it, pulling precious metal out of worthless stone. Cook off the mercury afterward, and you were left with pure silver. Suddenly, mountains that had been garbage were fortunes. And there was a mountain waiting. High in what is now Bolivia stood a peak the Spanish called Cerro Rico, the rich hill, above the boomtown of Potosí. It was, quite literally, a mountain of silver, and for 2 centuries it was the single most valuable piece of real estate on earth. The silver that poured out of Potosí funded Spanish armies, Spanish cathedrals, and Spanish wars across Europe. It sailed west across the Pacific on the Manila galleons to buy Chinese silk and spice, and east across the Atlantic to Seville. That Pacific, run alone, hauled silver across roughly 9,000 miles of open ocean, more than 3 times the drive from Los Angeles to New York City, in leaky wooden ships for months on end, so that a mountain in Bolivia could pay for a robe in Beijing. There is a fair argument that the modern global economy, the first true world market, silver flowing on every ocean at once, was born on that hill. And at its peak, the boomtown of Potosí swelled past 150,000 people, larger in its day than Boston, New York, and Philadelphia would be combined a century later. A silver city in the clouds, and every ounce of it depended on a jar of poison. But Cerro Rico could not run on silver alone. It ran on mercury. No mercury, no amalgamation. No amalgamation, no silver. The Spanish had a saying that cut straight to the bone of it. Sin azoga no hay plata. Without quicksilver, there is no silver, which meant that whoever controlled the mercury controlled the empire. And the Spanish crown understood exactly what it was holding. It seized the mercury supply as a royal monopoly, the king's personal chokehold on the lifeblood of the richest colony in the world. A shipment of mercury was guarded like a shipment of gold, because in a real sense, it was worth more than gold. Gold just sat there, but mercury made the silver that made everything else. For a while, the empire leaned on Almadén, hauling Spanish mercury across the Atlantic as ballast in the bellies of treasure ships. But the New World was hungry, and a closer source would be worth a king's ransom. In the 1560s, the Spanish found one. High in the Peruvian Andes, in a district that would take the name Huancavelica, they hit a cinnabar deposit so rich it could feed Potosí for generations. The colonial officials called Huancavelica the soul of all the mining towns in the kingdom. The people sent to dig it called it something else. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel covers the hidden histories behind the things that shape the world. Real stories, real numbers, no filler. New video every week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, whether you're in Texas, New York, or somewhere in between. I always want to know. The people sent to dig Huancavelica called it La Mina de la Muerte, the mine of death. To feed it, the Spanish built a machine for consuming human beings, and they built it out of an old idea. The Inca had long required communities to send men to take turns on public works, a rotating labor duty called the mita. The Spanish viceroy Francisco de Toledo took that custom and twisted it into something monstrous. Under the colonial mita, indigenous villages across an enormous stretch of the Andes were forced to send a fixed share of their men, often 1 in 7, to the mines year after year, whether they came home or not. The draft zone that fed the mines covered something like 25,000 square miles. That is roughly the size of West Virginia, an entire American state's worth of territory, emptied on a schedule to keep one hillside producing poison. Follow one of those men into the mountain. He is walking to a mine nearly 2.5 miles above sea level, where the air is so thin that just climbing the path leaves a healthy man gasping. He goes down into tunnels lit by tallow candles, into heat and dust and dark, and he swings a pick at rock that glitters faintly red. The dust he breathes is cinnabar. When the ore is hauled up and roasted to release the metal, the vapor drifts across the whole settlement, so that even the men who never go underground are breathing it in the streets, in their sleep, in the food their families cook. The symptoms came in an order the miners learned to dread. First the mouth, a taste of metal, then sores, then the gums going soft, then the shaking. Their hands would start to tremble and never stop, a fine involuntary shudder that got worse until they couldn't hold a cup. Their teeth fell out, some lost their minds. The Spanish had a name for the wasted, trembling wrecks the mine produced: azogado, mercury sick. A man could be azogado and still be sent back down, because the empire needed the silver, and the silver needed the mercury, and the mercury needed bodies. How many died is impossible to count exactly. Historians who study Huancavelica work with fragmented colonial records, and estimates vary. But several serious scholars put mortality in the worst decades at roughly 1/3 of the men who worked there. 1/3 in the periods for which we have the starkest numbers. Imagine a labor system where you understood, sending your son off, that there was a coin flip adjacent chance he was never coming back, and that if he did come back, he might come back shaking and toothless and half gone. Families fled entire regions to dodge the draft. Communities that had stood for centuries scattered into the mountains to keep their men out of the mine of death. And the colonial administration knew all of it. The critics of the day, priests, officials, men with functioning consciences, wrote it down plainly. They called Huancavelica a public slaughterhouse. They begged the crown to shut it. And the crown's own officers looked at the arithmetic, the workers on one side, the silver that funded the entire empire on the other, and made a decision. Regardless of what it cost in human lives, the amalgamators needed mercury. So the mine stayed open. The draft continued. When one viceroy tried to ease the underground labor, his successor simply authorized sending the men back down. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. A colonial bureaucrat signing off on another labor rotation, choosing silver over the lives of people he would never meet, locked in a system that would grind through Andean communities for the better part of 250 years, and would leave Huancavelica, to this day, one of the most mercury-poisoned places on the face of the earth. Now hold that image, the miner, shaking, his teeth loose, his mouth full of metal. Because at that exact moment, on the other side of the Atlantic, doctors were taking the same poison and rubbing it into open wounds, on purpose, as medicine. Here's a question, and I want you to actually sit with it for a second. How much of what a doctor does to you do you take on faith, because he's the doctor, and you're scared, and he sounds certain? Hold on to that. We are going to come back to it, because for 5 centuries, it is the whole story. In 1495, a new horror tore through Europe. A French army was besieging Naples, and out of that army, and the camp followers around it, came a disease no one had seen before. It raised hideous sores, ate into flesh and bone, drove some victims mad, and killed slowly and publicly. Everyone blamed everyone else. The Italians called it the French disease. The French called it the Neapolitan disease. History settled on syphilis, and within a few years it had spread across the entire continent. At its peak, the disease cut through cities with a ferocity that left contemporaries comparing it to the plague. Though historians still debate the true scale of infection, with estimates varying widely depending on the source and the decade. There was no cure, but there was mercury. Doctors had used it on skin diseases for ages, and syphilis showed on the skin, so they reached for the quicksilver. They rubbed mercury ointments into the sores until the body reacted. They rolled patients into overheated rooms and had them swallow it, drink it, or sit for days inside sealed fumigation boxes with a block of cinnabar smouldering on a hot iron beneath them, breathing the vapor, the exact vapor that was killing the miners of Huancavelica, until they salivated uncontrollably. That salivation was the point. Physicians believed the drool was the disease pouring out of the body, so more drool meant more cure. Sit with one of those patients through a course of it. He's been shut inside a small sealed room kept brutally hot, wrapped in blankets, a fire beneath a pan of cinnabar, filling the space with vapor he cannot escape. Day after day. His mouth fills with a metallic taste that never leaves. Sores bloom along his gums and the inside of his cheeks. His breath turns foul enough that the room clears when he speaks. The saliva comes and comes, a pint, a quart in a day, pouring out faster than he can spit into the basin, and his doctor nods, satisfied, because that flood is the proof it's working. His teeth loosen one by one. In the worst cases, the flesh of the jaw and cheek begins to die and rot, a condition doctors would later name mercurial gangrene, and a man could lose part of his own face to the treatment. A single reckless night could sentence you to months, even years, of this. Which is exactly where the grim old proverb comes from, the one that followed Mercury around for 400 years. A night with Venus and a lifetime with Mercury. Did it work? Mostly, no. Syphilis has a cruel habit of going quiet on its own for years, so any treatment could look like a cure right up until the disease came roaring back. Mercury poisoned patients about as reliably as it treated them. And yet it remained the standard of care, the thing a respectable doctor prescribed, for the better part of 500 years. It outlasted kings, revolutions, and the entire scientific revolution. It was still the first-line treatment in 1910, when a German scientist named Paul Ehrlich finally found something better, an arsenic compound he called salvarsan, the 606th thing he'd tested, marketed as the magic bullet. Trading mercury for arsenic. That was the upgrade. It wasn't until penicillin arrived in 1943, tested on its first syphilis patients at a US Marine hospital on Staten Island, New York, that the mercury era finally, mercifully, ended. One of the American doctors who worked on that penicillin breakthrough said it plainly, looking back. Before penicillin, he wrote, the heavy metal cure had been killing thousands of people a year. Not the disease, the cure. Quick question before we cross the Atlantic, and I want a real answer. Take a guess and hold on to it. How many cans of tuna do you figure this whole country goes through in a single year? Not a research number, just your gut. Drop your guess in the comments. I'll give you the real one before we're done, and I promise it lands harder than it sounds. You might be thinking this is a European story, a Spanish story, an old story. It is not, because mercury did not just come to America. For a while, America was where the whole global mercury story turned. Go to the hills just south of San Jose, California. Today, that valley is the beating heart of Silicon Valley, the most concentrated pile of wealth and technology in human history, all glass office parks and self-driving cars. Under those same hills sits a place called New Almadén, named, of course, after the great mine in Spain, and it holds a secret that almost nobody driving past it knows. The most valuable mine in California history was not a gold mine. It was a mercury mine. The local Olón people had used the red cinnabar there as body paint for generations. In 1845, 4 years before the gold rush, a Mexican army officer, recognized the ore for what it was, and staked a claim. When gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in 1848 and the world stampeded to California, the miners hit the same wall the Spanish had hit 3 centuries earlier. You cannot easily pull fine gold out of crushed rock without mercury to bind it. And there, sitting in the hills above the goldfields, was America's own quicksilver. New Almadén went off like a bomb. It became the most productive mercury mine in North America, pouring out more than 1 million flasks of the liquid metal. Over its lifetime, it generated more raw wealth. Historical estimates run into the hundreds of millions of dollars worth of metal than any single gold mine in the state. It broke the old European stranglehold on mercury and armed the American West with its own supply. The fight over who owned it went all the way to the US Supreme Court, and the case became a foundation stone of Western mining law. But the gold miners used that mercury the way everyone always used mercury, recklessly, and then they walked away. Across the Sierra Nevada, prospectors dumped an estimated 10 million pounds and more of it into California's rivers and streams to catch their gold. It never left. To this day, more than a century and a half later, that gold rush mercury is still working its way through California waterways, still turning up in the fish, still the reason the state posts health warnings on certain reservoirs. And the New Almadén mine itself, which ran until 1976, left a plume of mercury that still seeps into San Francisco Bay, poisoning the water beneath the wealthiest region on the continent. That is the physical legacy, but mercury was doing something even more intimate to Americans. It was in their medicine cabinets. It was in their mouths. Through the 1800s, the most common drug in America was a mercury compound called calomel. Doctors handed it out for everything: fevers, constipation, teething babies, depression, cholera, you name it. In an era of medicine that genuinely believed the way to heal you was to purge you until you were empty. Calomel did that. It also poisoned people, sometimes fatally, and left survivors with the same loose teeth and rotting gums the syphilis patients got. The list of famous Americans it touched is staggering. When Lewis and Clark set out to cross the continent in 1804, they carried hundreds of mercury laxative pills nicknamed thunderclappers. The dose was so violent and mercury so permanent that archaeologists have actually pinpointed the expedition's campsites 2 centuries later by testing the soil at their latrines for the mercury the men left behind. Think about that. A chemical so indestructible it maps their bathroom breaks across the whole American West. And Abraham Lincoln took a mercury pill called Blue Mass for his melancholy. Researchers who recreated the recipe found that at Lincoln's dosage, he was swallowing thousands of times more mercury than the EPA today considers safe. Some historians think his notorious pre-war rages and tremors may have been mercury poisoning. He seems to have quit the pills around the time he took office, meaning it's at least possible that one reason Lincoln could hold the Union together with a steady hand in 1861 is that he'd stopped poisoning himself the year before. During the Civil War, calomel was dosed to soldiers on both sides so heavily that the Union's own Surgeon General, William Hammond, tried to ban it from the Army's medicine chest, and his fellow doctors were so enraged at losing their favorite drug that they got him court-martialed for it. He was punished for trying to stop the poisoning. There was one more place mercury hid in American life, and it gave us a phrase you still use. For 100 years, the felt in American hats was cured with a mercury solution, and the men and women who made them breathed the fumes all day. Stand in a hat shop in Danbury, Connecticut. For generations, the hat-making capital of the country, a town that stamped Danbury crowns them all on its own reputation. The workrooms are warm and damp with steam, and the air carries mercury vapor the workers can't see and were never warned about. They lean over the felt for 10, 12 hours a day, year after year, and slowly it takes them. Their hands begin to shake so badly they can't drink from a cup without spilling. Their speech slurs. They grow paranoid, irritable, strange. Locals had a name for the affliction, the Danbury Shakes, and the country had a name for the people it produced. We got it straight from the hatters. Mad as a hatter. Here's the gut punch. This wasn't the Middle Ages. Mercury wasn't finally pulled out of American hat-making until 1941. The same year the country went to war, within living memory of people's grandparents. For 4 centuries, on 3 continents, humans watched Mercury shake the hands and steal the minds of everyone who touched it, wrote it all down in plain language, and kept reaching for it anyway. By the middle of the 20th century, it looked like the reckoning was finally coming. Penicillin ended the mercury syphilis cure. A cheaper chemical process ended mercury in gold mining. Calomel faded out of the pharmacy. Americans could tell themselves the age of the living silver was over, that they'd been foolish, learned their lesson, and moved on. They were wrong. Mercury didn't leave. It just changed its address. It moved from the medicine cabinet to the smokestack. And from the smokestack, it found a way into almost every American body alive. What I haven't told you yet is what the people putting mercury into your air right now already know, and have known for decades. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't the story you were told. Do me one favor, hit subscribe. It's the single thing that helps these deep dives reach more people. Okay, back to it, because this next part is where it stops being history and starts being about you. To understand what mercury does to America today, you have to go to a small fishing town in Japan called Minamata and watch a company do to a bay what the Spanish did to a mountain. Starting in 1932, a chemical company called Chiso began dumping mercury waste into Minamata Bay. It kept doing it for decades. The mercury settled into the mud, and there it underwent a quiet chemical change that is the whole key to this story. Bacteria converted it into a form called methylmercury, and methylmercury does something ordinary mercury doesn't. It bioaccumulates. It climbs the food chain. Small fish absorb a little. Bigger fish eat the small fish and hold on to all of it. The biggest fish become swimming concentrations of poison. And the people of Minamata ate fish at nearly every meal. The first sign something was wrong was the cats. They ate the fish scraps, and they began to convulse and stagger and spin in circles before they died. The locals called it the dancing cat disease. Then it came for the people. Numb hands, slurred speech, failing vision, convulsions, and, most horrifying of all, babies born with catastrophic brain damage to mothers who had seemed perfectly healthy. Because methylmercury crosses the placenta and attacks a developing brain even when it barely touches the mother. Roughly 3,000 people were officially certified as victims. At least 1,800 died. And here is the part that should sound familiar, because you have heard this exact beat before in this very story. Chiso's own scientists identified the company's mercury as the cause by 1959, and the company concealed it and kept dumping. It didn't stop until 1968. It didn't accept responsibility until victims dragged it through court and won in 1973. Minamata is why the entire modern world takes mercury seriously. It is the case that proved, beyond argument, that industrial mercury in the water becomes methylmercury in the fish, becomes brain damage in the people. Every fish advisory posted in America traces back to what happened in that bay. It's why, in 2013, more than 140 nations, the United States among the very first to sign on, adopted an international treaty to rein mercury in and named it as a permanent memorial, the Minamata Convention. So the science is settled, the danger is proven, the whole world signed a treaty about it. Now here is what is happening in America. The single largest source of mercury pollution in the United States is not a mine. It's not a chemical plant. It is coal-fired power plants. By the EPA's own accounting, the biggest domestic emitter of mercury into the air. Here's the mechanism, and it's brutally simple. Coal has traces of mercury in it. Burn enough coal to power a country, and you send tons of mercury up the smokestacks every year. It drifts, it falls, it lands in lakes and rivers and the ocean. Bacteria turn it into methylmercury. It climbs the food chain into exactly the big predator fish Americans love to eat: tuna, swordfish, king mackerel, and it ends up in people. Especially, just like Minamata, in pregnant women and the developing brains of their children. This is why the FDA and the EPA jointly warn pregnant women, nursing mothers, and young children to limit certain fish, and put out an actual chart sorting seafood into best choices, good choices, and a blunt choices to avoid. On that avoid list sit the big, long-lived predators that concentrate the most mercury: swordfish, king mackerel, shark, and the largest tuna. It's the same lesson Minamata taught, printed on a government pamphlet. Except this time the poison isn't coming from one factory pipe. It's coming from the sky, everywhere, at once. It's a genuinely cruel trap, because fish is also one of the healthiest foods there is. The same FDA analysis found that the right fish during pregnancy can measurably raise a child's IQ. So the government is stuck telling Americans, eat fish, it's good for your baby's brain, but not too much of the wrong kind, because it will poison your baby's brain. Both things are true. The line between them is mercury, and the cost of getting it wrong is measurable in dollars. I went looking for the cartoon version of a corporate villain here, the secret memo where an executive does the math and decides poisoning children is cheaper than clean smokestacks. That single memo doesn't exist, and I'm not going to invent one for you. But you don't need it because the real arithmetic is right out in the open. Researchers at Mount Sinai put a price tag on the brain damage. They estimated that the lost IQ and lost lifetime earnings from methylmercury exposure cost the United States billions of dollars a year, with a large chunk of it traceable specifically to American power plants. That's not a lawsuit. That's a permanent, quiet tax on the intelligence of American children, paid in points off their IQ before they're even born. For a while, America was actually winning this fight. In 2012, the EPA finally put real limits on mercury from power plants, the Mercury and Air Toxics Standards, MATS for short. They worked, and fast. Within 5 years, mercury pollution from those plants dropped by 86%. 86% from one rule. It's one of the most effective public health measures most Americans have never heard of. Then it went the other way. In 2024, regulators moved to tighten those standards further, arguing the technology was cheap and available, and most plants had already met the bar. And in February of 2026, according to reporting from environmental and industry press at the time, the EPA reversed course and finalized a repeal of that tightening, rolling the rules back to the older 2012 version. The agency announced it at a coal plant on the banks of the Ohio River in Louisville, Kentucky. The coal industry welcomed it, arguing the rollback protects reliable, affordable electricity and keeps aging plants running. Public health and environmental groups condemned it, arguing it means more mercury in the air, more in the fish, and more brain damage in children living downwind. As of this recording, the fight is in federal court. I'm not here to tell you how to vote on it. I'm here to tell you what mercury does. That part isn't a matter of opinion. It's a matter of a poisoned bay in Japan and 1,800 graves. And to tell you where the mercury goes. It goes into the water. It goes into the fish. It goes, eventually, into you. Chiso knew by 1959 and kept dumping for 9 more years. The old proverb warned about mercury for 400 years, and doctors prescribed it anyway. The Spanish crown was told Huancavelica was a slaughterhouse and kept it open for 2 centuries. The pattern in this whole story never changes. Somebody always knows what mercury does, and there is always a reason to keep going. So, that guess you've been holding on to. How much canned tuna does America go through in a year? Here's the real number. Americans eat roughly 1 billion pounds of canned and pouched tuna every single year. Nearly 9 out of 10 American households keep it in the pantry. At the grocery store, only 2 products on Earth outsell canned tuna per foot of shelf space: coffee and sugar. That humble tuna melt, that lunchbox sandwich, that gym bag protein, that is the single most common way coal plant mercury completes its journey from a smokestack in the Ohio Valley into an American body. you will probably walk past a wall of it at Costco or Walmart this week without a second thought. And it isn't just what you eat. It might be in your head right now. Those silver dental fillings, the ones more than 100 million Americans are walking around with, are about half mercury by weight. In 2020, after decades of insisting they were fine, the FDA issued a formal warning that certain people should avoid them. Pregnant women, nursing mothers, young children, people with kidney or neurological problems. The agency even told dentists to stop calling them silver fillings, because the name hides what they actually are. There is a real chance you are carrying a piece of this 500-year-old story in your own teeth. It's in the old thermometer in the back of a drawer, the kind that beads and scatters if it breaks. It's in the curly fluorescent bulb that releases a puff of mercury vapor if you drop it. The living silver never left American life. We just stopped looking at it. Slow down with me for a second, because this is the part that matters. Follow the thread the whole way. The same shining liquid that a Roman convict died breathing at Almadén, that an Andean father breathed in the mine of death to make silver for a king he'd never see, that doctors rubbed into the sores of syphilis patients for 5 centuries, that Lincoln swallowed for his sadness, that armed the California gold rush and poisoned San Francisco Bay. That same element is falling out of the sky today and settling into the fish on the American table. It was never a series of separate mistakes. It was one substance, doing the one thing it has always done, while humans kept finding new reasons to reach for it. Because mercury is genuinely, maddeningly useful. It pulls silver from stone and gold from gravel. It cures nothing but looks like it might. It powered empires and gold rushes and the birth of the global economy. Every single time, someone knew the cost, wrote it down, warned the next generation, and every single time, the usefulness won and the warning got filed away. The story of mercury is not the story of people who didn't know. It's the story of people who knew and did it anyway, because there was silver in the hill and money in the coal. So here's the real question, and I'm not going to answer it for you. How many of the things running your life right now, in your food, in your water, in your body, were decided by someone doing that same quiet arithmetic, weighing your health against their profit, in a room you were never allowed to enter? Let that sit for a minute. And then do a couple of things for me. Have you ever had a silver filling put in, or grown up on tuna sandwiches, without anyone once mentioning the word mercury? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the real history behind the things that run your life, subscribe. Hit the like button. It tells me you want to keep going deeper, and share this with someone who thinks they already know how the world works. Because the next time you crack open a can of tuna at your kitchen counter, or run your tongue over an old filling, or watch a coal plant smoke smear across the horizon on the drive home, you're going to remember that it's all the same silver, the poison that killed the miners, the cure that killed Schubert, the metal that built an empire and never once let go. They spent 500 years trying to bury it. It's sitting in your pantry and it's swimming in your dinner, and now you can't unsee it.